We will take measures to lower the cost of doing business in South Africa and increase productivity and improve competitiveness.
We will revive the economy. We will develop Nigeria.
For the second time in as many weeks, President William Ruto has found himself on the receiving end, with the youth seeking to know why he is yet to fulfill his pre-election promises.
If democracy is working, why do African hospitals still lack basic equipment? Why are millions of school children out of school? Why are lights still off across the continent? If democracy is supposed to be the solution, then why does it feel like nothing ever changes? Across Africa, more and more people are saying, has democracy failed us? Some are beginning to answer, yes. They say democracy is a foreign concept. They say we need more strongmen and benevolent dictators to get things done. They say democracy is too slow, too messy, and too Western. But here's the truth. Africa doesn't need less democracy. It needs more. Not fake democracy, not recycled autocrats, but real democracy. With institutions, accountability, and power in the hands of the people. But why? Why is the very idea of democracy, something once welcomed with fireworks and speeches at independence, now under suspicion in the hearts of so many? Because democracy, as many Africans experience it today, looks like this. You line up under the scorching sun, you vote like your parents did and their parents before them, and still the same faces return to power. The same promises are made, the same disappointments follow. In Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, over 133 million people live in poverty, even as politicians buy bulletproof SUVs with public money. In Uganda, Yoweri Museveni has been in power since 1986. That's nearly 40 years ago. A full generation of Ugandans have never known another leader, yet elections still happen almost like a ritual. In Zimbabwe, the national currency has collapsed again, and inflation is soaring past 100%, but the ruling party remains untouched, shielded by a system that calls itself democratic. In Cameroon, Paul Biya, who spends more time in Switzerland than in Yaoundé, is still called president, nearly 42 years after taking office. So yes, you can understand the frustration. You can understand why people ask, what's the point of democracy if nothing changes? What's the point of elections if the results are pre-written? What's the point of freedom of speech if speaking freely can get you arrested or worse? In recent years, the frustration has grown into a quiet but dangerous idea. An idea that perhaps democracy is not African, that maybe Africa needs a strong hand, a firm ruler, a man with a gun and a plan. But here's the twist. Maybe the problem isn't that democracy has failed Africa. Maybe the problem is that Africa has never truly had democracy. Because what's democracy really? Is it simply elections every 4 years? Or is it the rule of law? Is it the ability of citizens to check their leaders? Is it healthcare that works, roads that function, schools that stay open? Is it a system that listens when people cry? In too many African countries, democracy has been reduced to a max, a performance, a pretty name for something else entirely. And if we want to understand how we got here, how the dream of freedom turned into frustration, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to the early 1960s, when Africa stood at the gates of independence, hopeful, idealistic, and ready to govern itself. In 1960, African nations were on fire, not with war, but with hope. Across the continent, colonial flags were falling. The Union Jack came down in Nigeria. The tricolor was folded in Senegal, and the Belgian lion was sent packing from Congo. For the first time in centuries, Africans were going to rule themselves. And with independence came a seductive promise that democracy, that shimmering Western idea, would be the path to prosperity. New constitutions were drafted with great ceremony, parliaments were formed, elections were organized, parties campaigned with slogans like "Freedom Now" and "One Man, One Vote." In Accra, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah declared, "We face neither east nor west, we face forward." In Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe wrote about building a nation guided by unity in diversity. In Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta promised land reform, education, and dignity. They believed truly that democracy would be the engine of African renewal. But there was a catch. A hidden flaw built into the very foundation of this dream. The African leaders of the 1960s were inheriting states that were never designed for democracy. These were colonial creations, artificial borders, arbitrary capitals, divided tribes, extractive economies, and worst of all, a deep suspicion of popular power. The colonial state was not built to serve, it was built to extract. And so when independence came, African leaders inherited the throne, but not the tools to govern democratically. The police still answered to power and not the people. The army still crushed dissent, not defended liberty. The state was a fortress, not a bridge. And slowly, sometimes quickly, the dream began to fade. One by one, the parliaments were dissolved. Multi-party systems gave way to single-party states. Opposition was branded as treason. Leaders declared themselves presidents for life. In Ghana, Nkrumah outlawed opposition parties and centralized power. In Tanzania, Julius Nyerere created a one-party state in the name of unity. In Congo, Mobutu Sese Seko took over with Western backing and will rule for 32 years. All across Africa, democracy was shrinking and authoritarianism was rising. But the world kept calling it democracy because elections still happened and because these regimes often wore suits instead of uniforms. Meanwhile, citizens began to wonder, is this what we fought for? Is this what independence looked like? The original promise that democracy will bring dignity, equality, and development had turned into something else. And yet, despite everything, the people did not stop believing. They marched on, still voted, still hoped. But decades of betrayal will leave scars. Scars that today fit the idea that democracy doesn't work in Africa. But the truth is, it was never given the chance to. Somewhere between the ballot box and the palace gates, democracy got lost. In many African countries today, elections still happen. Political parties exist, campaign posters fill the street, voters queue under the sun, and yet nothing changes. Power doesn't shift, corruption doesn't end, roads doesn't get built, electricity doesn't flow, hospitals remain understaffed, schools remain overcrowded. So people ask, what is going on? What we are seeing across large parts of the continent isn't democracy. It's what scholars call electoral authoritarianism, a system where elections are held regularly, but their outcome is a foregone conclusion. It's democracy as theater, democracy as a costume, the appearance of legitimacy without the substance of it. Take Uganda, where President Yoweri Museveni has ruled since 1986, nearly 40 years. He has changed the constitution twice to eliminate term and age limits. Elections are held, but the opposition is routinely harassed, jailed, or silenced. When popular musician turned politician Bobby Wine tried to challenge him, he was beaten, arrested, and blocked from campaigning. Museveni still won with 58% of the vote. Was it democracy or was it a performance? In Cameroon, Paul Biya has been in power since 1982. He spent months of each year living in luxury hotels in Switzerland, while his country struggles with insurgency and economic stagnation. He wins elections with Soviet-style numbers, 71%, 78%, 89%. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe claimed to be a liberator, and he was, until he wasn't anymore. He ruled for 37 years, using election to rubber stamp his authority while the economy crumbled and dissent was crushed. The same patterns repeat themselves. Leaders organize elections not to be challenged but to be crowned. Opposition figures are not political rivals, they are enemies of the state. Judges are not neutral, they are loyalists in ropes. And the media, often censored, bought off, or driven into exile. It's like staging a football match where one team writes the rules, chooses the referee, and builds the scorecard. Then when they win, they say, see, the people have spoken. But the people are not blind. From Senegal to Sudan, from DR Congo to Guinea, they are rising. Young Africans are tweeting, protesting, and organizing. rejecting these hollow democracies. Because when democracy becomes a mask for tyranny, people start to ask the dangerous question: maybe democracy doesn't work for us at all. But that question misses the point. It's not democracy that failed. It's that real democracy was never allowed to begin. Africa is the youngest continent on earth. More than 70% of its population is under the age of 30. That's over 800 million young people, born in the era of global connectivity, access to education, and rising aspiration. They can see the world, they can compare, they know what leadership looks like, and they know what they are not getting. So they are not fooled. Across the continent, dissatisfaction is boiling over. In Nigeria, the giant of Africa, country blessed with oil and human capital, young people took the streets in 2020 under the End SARS movement. What began as a protest against police brutality became a cry of frustration against decades of broken promises. Unemployment over 40% among the youth, unstable electricity, rigged election, and leaders who seem far removed from the lives of their people. In Senegal, one of West Africa's most stable democracies, young people rioted in 2021 and again in 2023. Why? Because they saw the ruling elite manipulate laws and institutions to try and eliminate opposition voices, a betrayal of democratic principles they cherished. In Sudan, it was the power of the civilian protest that brought down the 30-year-old dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir. In DR Congo, in Guinea, in Burkina Faso, in Kenya, the streets are alive. What they are saying is loud and clear. We're tired of leaders who speak of democracy but govern like monarchs. The Afrobarometer, a respected Pan-African survey platform, reported that more than 2/3 of Africans still believe in democracy. But here's the twist. The same survey shows that less than half are satisfied with how democracy works in their own country. This gap between what people want and what they get is the real crisis. It's not that Africans don't want democracy. It's that they are being served its worst version. A democracy without accountability, a vote without power, a voice without an ear to hear it. And so, the streets speak louder. Young people are finding their own language of protest, hashtags, music, satire, graffiti, mass actions. What they are rejecting is not democracy, but hypocrisy. And unless something changes, unless true reforms come, the danger is not that people will abandon democracy. The danger is that they may begin to admire strongmen because at least strongmen get things done. This is the opening autocrats are waiting for. This is the crack they slip through. But the answer is not to surrender democracy, it is to make democracy real for the first time. For too long, democracy in Africa has been reduced to a single event, Election Day. Every 4 or 5 years, citizens line up under the scorching sun, clutching their voter cards with hope in their hearts. They cast their votes, sometimes in peaceful order, sometimes amid violence and intimidation, then they go home and wait. But real democracy is not what happens on one day, it is what happens every day after. True democracy is not just about choosing leaders, it is about limiting them. It's about institutions, not individuals. It is about rules, not rulers. In many African countries, elections happen, but the systems are hollow. The courts are captured, the legislature is a rubber stamp, the police protect the powerful, the press is intimidated or put up, civil society is harassed, the public has no real way of demanding accountability. What remains is a shell of democracy? A theater, a performance, the costumes are there, the actors on stage, but the story is rigged. Take a moment to compare two kinds of democracy. In one, a president can appoint judges who later rule on his own election case. In another, an independent judiciary can overturn a president's decision and he is forced to comply. In one, a parliament exists where every member owes their seat to the president's favor. In another, parliament can launch investigations and even impeach the head of state. These are not just technical differences, they shape people's lives. In countries with democratic systems, hospitals work because budgets are scrutinized. Schools improve because ministers fear losing elections. Electricity flows because citizens can protest without being shot. Jobs are created because governments can be changed peacefully when they fail. Where these mechanisms don't exist, elections become dangerous. They become a trigger for ethnic tension, violence, and despair, not because democracy is bad, but because it's incomplete. As the Kenyan legal scholar Makau Mutua once said, Africa's problem is not too much democracy, it's too little. The facade without the foundation. If you build a house and skip the foundation, don't blame the wind when it falls. Democracy is more than ballots. It is a culture, a system, a constant act of negotiation between government and the governed. And the truth is, the more deeply democracy is rooted, the more peaceful nations grow. The more responsive their leaders become, the more hopeful their citizens feel. This is not theory. We've seen it. If democracy works, then where's the proof? The proof lies quietly in the heart of Southern Africa, in a country that doesn't make global headlines, doesn't dominate news cycle, and doesn't parade its leaders before the world. That country is Botswana. When Botswana gained independence from Britain in 1966, it was by almost every metric one of the poorest countries in the world. There was only 22 university graduates in the entire country. It had just 12 kilometers of paved road. It had little infrastructure, no powerful army, and virtually no industry. But what it did have was a leadership grounded in democratic values. Seret Sekama, the country's first president, rejected strongman model. He rejected dictatorship. He didn't stay in power until death. Instead, Botswana created a constitution that limited presidential limits to 10 years. It fostered a professional civil service, an independent judiciary, and a parliament that debates and checks power. And it worked. Today, Botswana is a middle-income country. Its GDP per capita is one of the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. It has one of the least corrupt governments on the continent, according to Transparency International. It boasts universal primary education, a functioning healthcare system, and some of the best road networks in Africa. While other African leaders looted mineral wealth to build palaces, Botswana used diamond revenues to build schools and hospitals. They planned for future generations, not just for re-election. And democracy played a central role in that progress. Because of regular peaceful transfer of power, no single man has become a permanent fixture. Because institutions were strong, corruption was punished. And because civil society could breathe, the press remained relatively free and citizens had space to speak. Botswana is not perfect. No country is. But it shows what is possible when democracy is more than just a ritual. When it becomes a way of governing, a way of thinking, and a way of listening. As former President Festus Mogae once put it, we have succeeded not because we are richer than others, but because we chose to invest in our people and respect the rules. Now ask yourself, if democracy can take Botswana from 22 graduates to a thriving modern nation, what could it do for Nigeria, for DR Congo, for Sudan, for Zimbabwe, or for Ethiopia, if given the same chance? Not the fake democracy that wraps itself in election, but the real kind, the kind that builds nations. So, has democracy failed in Africa? The honest answer is, Africa hasn't had enough of it to fail. What we have seen across continent is not the triumph of democracy, but its sabotage. Too often, democracy in Africa is reduced to a day. One election, one vote, but real democracy is not an event. It is a system, a culture, a continuous conversation between the governed and those in power. In many countries, that conversation has been silent. Presidents rewrite constitution to stay longer, courts are captured, opposition parties are harassed, protesters are jailed, journalists disappear, state institutions are converted into personal empires. Then when the people grow tired, when they march on the streets or vote for change, the same leaders clinging to power turn around and say, see, democracy doesn't work in Africa. But the truth is, democracy didn't fail. They failed democracy. It is the absence of democratic values, not democracy itself, that has led to instability, coups, civil wars, and failed states. It is the lack of accountability that allows stolen funds to be hidden in European banks while children go hungry in African schools. It is the lack of transparency that lets leaders hide oil contracts, inflate budget, and enrich their families while millions live without electricity. Look at Sudan, look at Guinea, look at Gabon. When elections are a joke, people stop believing. And when people stop believing, they stop participating. And when they stop participating, the system breaks. But there's another way. We've seen it. We've seen it in Botswana, in Ghana, in Mauritius, in Cape Verde. In places where democracy is allowed to breed, societies become more stable, more prosperous, and more just. Women get to vote and run. Youth participate, citizens ask questions, leaders are not gods. This is not a Western idea. This is not colonial mimicry. This is African potential. Because real democracy is not about copying the West. It's about giving power back to the people where it belongs. It's about governments that listen, courts that are fair, police that protect, budgets that reflect public interest, leaders who know they can be removed, not through bloodshed, but through ballot. That's not weakness, that's strength. As Nelson Mandela once said, let there be justice for all. Let there be peace. Let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. That dream is democratic. And for Africa to rise, to truly rise, we don't need fewer votes, fewer freedoms, or more military boats. We need stronger institutions, informed citizens, accountable leadership, and real democracy. Not less of it, more of it. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this, like, share, and subscribe. Until I see you again, bye bye.